Welcome everyone. Excited to see you all today. We're going to get started in just a minute. And in the meantime, if you want to put in the chat where you're calling in from and maybe a few words about how you're feeling today.
Welcome everybody. We're excited to see you. Just wait for everyone to get organized. I love seeing where people are coming in from.
Richmond, Texas. Oh, 2 people from Texas. Exciting. Pacifica, right down the street from me, kind of.
Kansas City.
Midwest, shout out.
Baltimore.
I just drove to Baltimore recently on the way back from a long COVID road trip, and we loved it. We were so impressed with Baltimore. My daughters were like, "This is really cool."
I went to college in DC, and every year my dad and I would drive down from Boston and go through Baltimore, and we'd eat crabs in Baltimore, and they were delicious. So that's my memory. Great. Okay, well, I'm gonna just kick things off, and people will be streaming in, but so welcome to Holding Space with Claire Bidwell-Smith and Amy Pickard. My name is Derek Hosberg. I am the program director at Reimagine, which is a nonprofit that sparks community experiences like this one. And, we explore the hardest parts of our existence, including illness and death. And we also try to inspire people to celebrate life and one another. Before I get started, I just want to express our profound gratitude to our festival sponsors who support Reimagine and make this work possible. I also want to thank all of the individual donors that make small donations to Reimagine that also make this work possible. So thank you. And these are my cats, Sammy and Biscuit, teaching us about Zoom, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. But the basics are that you can turn on and off your mic if you want to ask a question during the Q&A section. We encourage you to keep your cameras on just to make us feel more connected, but feel free to keep it off. And please add your comments and questions throughout the meeting into the chat. We'll get to them. Amy and Claire will start out with an interview between the two of them or discussion, and then we'll have at least the last 20 minutes for Q&A. And if the chat is bothering you, you can just click that little arrow at the top and click close. And thank you, Ellen. They are pretty smart cats. Okay, so, and I'm just going to introduce Claire, who is an internationally renowned author, speaker, and grief expert, and just altogether wonderful person. The author of 3 books of nonfiction, The Rules of Inheritance, After This, When Life is Over, Where Do We Go? And Anxiety, The Missing Stage of Grief. And I'm going to kick it off send it off to Claire.
Thank you. Thank you, Dara. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I love Thursdays. I keep saying this, but this is really, I started hosting these gatherings in April shortly after the pandemic broke out. And I just really wanted to provide a space where we could gather and talk about all the stuff that's been coming up for all of us: death, anxiety, grief, just kind of all the huge things that we're grappling with in ways that we maybe never have, or for those of us who have, it's bringing up old stuff and big stuff for us. So every week I've had a different guest on from the death and dying space, and we've had the most profound conversations. It has been so much fun. We've loved your participation. So, as Amy and I are talking today, please feel free to put in comments, questions. We'll open it up in the last 20, 30 minutes for that. And I just really love hearing from you guys and what you're thinking about and wondering about. I am so excited about our guest today, Amy Pickard. She is amazing. She's one of a kind. We met several years ago. I think it's been 4 or 5 years now, actually. And Amy is the founder of a company called Good to Go, which is a death planning service. And I'm gonna just have Amy start telling you about herself and all her amazing things. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Dara. Hi, everybody. I am originally from Dayton, Ohio, and I've lived in London and Chicago, and I ended up here in Los Angeles, where I am today. And I worked as a freelance video producer, broadcaster for the BBC, doing on-air stuff and hosting radio. And I was just living my happy showbiz life. And then my mom died in 2012, out of the blue. And she was my best friend, my biggest fan, and today is actually her deathversary. She died on August 6th, 2012, so I've got a little candle going for her. And I had never really experienced death in such a profound way, such a close death. And so you are in this wilderness of grief, but then, as you're struggling to kind of figure out how to be on the planet when your DNA has left it, you've got to do the death duties, which, P.S., no one ever gave me that memo, and I was completely overwhelmed. My mom died suddenly, unexpectedly. A year previously, I was bugging her to get her will done, and I was bugging my dad too. They've been divorced for 45 years, but my dad even said, "Are you yelling at your mom as much as you're yelling at me about this?" And I was like, yes, I am actually. But I started trying to tackle all of these death duties, and there were a million questions that I did not have an answer to, and the one person that had the answer was dead. And I joke that, like, the only reason I wished I could talk to my mom one more time, it wasn't for her to say I love you, it was for her to tell me her Wi-Fi password, and where was her car title, and what does she want me to do with this or that, or where's her rent, and how much is it, and who do I contact, so all these things. And I just started telling my friends and their parents about the nightmare that I was going through. And I basically turned into this advanced planning evangelist out of nowhere. And I realized that people were listening to me. My friends and their parents started getting their wills done and their living wills done. And I thought, well, wait a minute, people are listening to me. That's not normal. So I thought, well, maybe I can really make a difference and basically help transmute that horrible energy when you're grieving and you have no energy, but you've got to put energy into getting all of these things complete. A lot of people have to clean out houses at the same time. And so you've got to be a detective, a travel agent, a cleaner, a party planner, accountant, a business person. You have to be all of these things when someone dies. And so I created Good to Go. I just wanted to prevent other people from going through what I went through. And so all the different questions that I had for my mom, I wrote down. I took out a year and a half and I wrote it all in a little booklet called the Good to Go Departure File. And it just has all the everyday crap that nobody thinks that you need to know. Like in my Good to Go Departure File, I put down my landlord's number, my landlord's name, and when rent is due. So my friends can just, if something happens to me, they can just go to the booklet and see, and do I have a living will? It says here, what do I want done with my property, my jewelry, the story behind your jewelry, where did you get it, what's the story behind it, just all that kind of stuff. So wrapping up my rambly long explanation of who I am, basically I thought, well, how can I get this information out to people in a less kind of depressing way, because it is, viewed upon as being so morbid and awful. And I just thought, well, let's have a party. So I've got a rock and roll death soundtrack. Everyone brings a potluck dish. We have cocktails.
I had one of these parties at my house. Amy came. I had 12 people over. We did all of this at my house. It was amazing.
And that was the anniversary of your mom's passing.
Yeah, I try to do something meaningful every year on my parents' death anniversaries, and that year I was like, we're gonna get ready to die.
Yeah. But obviously because of COVID, the in-person parties aren't able to happen right now. I'm looking forward to when we can get back to that, so I'm just doing them via Zoom right now. But yeah, I just wanted to basically bring what whatever my own talent is, which is, I think, is humor and communication as a producer. And my real life stories are just hopefully going to convince people that this is what they need to do while they're young and healthy, not at the last minute or under duress.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you. I have so much I want to say and talk about with you. I'm really excited. My dad's death anniversary was yesterday. And I think we knew this about each other, that your mom and my dad were one day apart. And it was 17 years for me yesterday. And, my dad was the one who got me thinking about all this stuff and going through it. He was my second parent to die. So my mom died when I was 18, and I was an only child, and I became my father's caregiver when he got ill. And he died when I was only 25 years old. So I was caring for him, and he was in hospice. And he was really like, it was like kind of his last parenting moment, right? Like he was like, I'm going to get you ready to deal with my death. And I like kicked and screamed, I really didn't want to do it. He kept sitting me down. He kept having me make lists. He kept adding my name to bank accounts. He kept doing all of these practical things. I remember sitting at his kitchen table one night, just crying. And he was making me write down this list of, okay, what are the first 5 things you have to do when I die? And I was like, Dad, I don't want to do this. I don't want to make this list. This is horrible. This is morbid. He's like, it's not morbid, sweetie. You are going to be alone when I'm gone. And I want you to be able to figure out what to do. It's going to be so much harder if you don't know. And so he was making me write these things down. And when he died, I was so appreciative. I went and I got out that tear-stained list of stuff, and I did the things that he told me to do. And I never would have had any idea. I mean, I was 25. I was really on my own dealing with his death. And I would have had no idea who to ask. My friends didn't know. Like, it would have been a mess. And I was so grateful to him. And it really set me on this track of thinking about this stuff.
But when you were doing the death duties after he did sit you down, did you find, I mean, I found this, but did you find that it was more meaningful carrying out the death duties because it was honoring your dad in a way, because you remember those conversations that you had and those were kind of playing in your head, and so you feel like I don't know, it just feels like you're honoring the person if their wishes are very clear and concise.
Absolutely. And now that I've been a grief therapist for over a decade, one of the big things I see all the time with clients is they come in and they don't know what their person's wishes were. And it causes them a lot of angst and a lot of anxiety. They don't know what to do with certain things. Sometimes they don't even know if their person wanted to be buried or cremated or where or what, and what to do with all this stuff. Oh my gosh, and it's such a huge task. And then siblings fight over things, not to fight over objects, but fight over like who's going to deal with it. Like I recently had a client who had 2 other brothers, and he ended up having to deal with the sale of the house and dealing with all the belongings. And he had a lot of resentment towards his brothers, and I think it is such a gift for us to put these things in place for our family. It's like our last final gift we can give them of organizing this stuff for them. It's really important.
And it's so crazy to me that I'm sure everybody watching, if you have a partner or if you have a child, I'm sure their favorite pizza toppings. I'm sure their favorite ice cream and, all these things that about those close to you, but you don't know the most important thing is, what are your wishes if something happens to you? And especially with COVID-19, I mean, that's kind of has exposed the fear that none of us are going to get out alive, and so it's very, very timely. And I was even telling my clients and my friends during the pandemic, at least have a conversation. If you don't have the energy to write it down or to get the legal documents, at least have the conversation of your thoughts about intubation, your thoughts about dying alone, because a lot of COVID patients die alone for fear of being contagious and giving other people the disease. But again, then I try to look at it as not necessarily dying alone, because of course they have the beautiful healthcare workers there that hold their hands and make them feel so warm and lovely and standing in for their relatives. But yeah, it's important to have these conversations. So many people don't know, and we make more of an effort to build our own burrito than we do put planning into what we want when we go.
So one of the things the thing I really love about Good to Go, about your company, is it's not so much about all the legalities and the technical stuff, which is one aspect for sure. But it's really about like more of, I redid mine. I worked on a departure file years ago with you. I redid it recently during COVID. My biggest fear, since I lost both of my parents young, is that I will die young and leave my three children, without a mom at a young age. And it's just my deepest fear. I grapple with it all the time. When COVID came out, like, it got stirred up for me again. And so one of the things that was most important for me was to know, like, way more emotional stuff, object stuff. I want them to know certain things. If I were to die tomorrow, there's a lot of like really random, obscure stuff I would want them to have that my husband would have no idea that I really wanted them to have that thing, or where that thing came from, or certain wishes, like I'd like them to go to this one place. Or tell us about all the different pieces in your departure file, because I just think you really came up with some good stuff there.
Well, there's so many, but just a simple question like, do you have possession of someone else's cremains? And if so, what do you want done with them?
I had to put that in mine. I still have portions of both of my parents' ashes. I don't know why, I just haven't finished spreading them. I've spread them in lots of places. And so at one point I was like, oh my God, they're going to come across that in the closet. And so I've had to put that in my thing. I was like, I would like them scattered with mine. And here
yes, or combined or something like that. So it's just so important, because I had a client whose mother died, and then she was cleaning out her belongings and found her mom's first dog's ashes. And she said, what do I do with it? She was like, I didn't talk to mom about what to do with these. I said, why don't you just sprinkle them where you're going to sprinkle your mom, if she cared enough to have them under her bed that all those years. But it's just little things like, do you have a storage space? And if so, where is it? What number is it? Who's got the key? And is it what's in there? And, it's just those daily logistics that are such a nightmare and are so time consuming. And when you're grieving, you don't want to be a detective, or at least I didn't. I just wanted to be carried around like Cleopatra and just fed bonbons. I just was like, oh my gosh, it's so depleting. And, if I can help in the death duties just a little, to just take that burden away and transmute that energy from uncertainty to certainty, that's the whole point, is just to make things easier for people who are grieving.
You have some amazing stuff in there. Like, I'm a writer. I've always been a writer. I've written 3 books, and 2 of them are very personal. And so I know that there's a lot of questions my kids might have that can be answered in those books. Like there's thoughts about what I think happens when we die. There's, tales of my life in there, but not everybody has written those books. So you have great questions in there to kind of prompt those things that people might want to know after someone is gone.
Well, I definitely found, because I was missing my mom's physical connection, I started connecting to her through her favorite things. And so the first half of the Good to Go departure file is all logistics about your bills, your online passwords, what you want done with social media, all those things. What do you want done? A life celebration, all the details of that. If you want a traditional church service, all the details of that. What do you want to be dressed in? What kind of food do you want for your life celebration or funeral, or things? How do you want people to dress? All those different things. But then the second half of the departure file is, like you said, a more ethical, spiritual will in a way. And it says, what do you believe happens when we die? Because my mom's beliefs really comforted me. She believed what I believe, that we're just souls in this physical shell, and that we transition, but we're light and love and all that good stuff. And that comforted me. I also have words of comfort I would give you while you are grieving my death. And so, and like you said, what happens when we die, things like that. And then just, your favorite things, your favorite books, your movies, favorite travel destinations. I know that if, just for example, if, my mom's favorite place in Paris was a certain cafe, I know that if I ever went to Paris, I'd go and have a cappuccino, think of her, and connect to her through that. And so it's
I
basically
love that. I think that's such a cool thing. I've had some clients who were facing death and had young children, and in some of the planning we came up with of things to leave behind for their kids, one of the things that I've always worked on with them is a list of places that were meaningful for them, so that when their child is older, in their 20s or 30s, they can travel to these places and stand on some cliff in Ireland that their mom stood on when she was 20 and like feel that moment. And it's just such a cool thing to leave behind, I think.
I love that. I love that.
Here's the big thing I want to talk to you about. Like, let's talk about resistance to doing this stuff, because everyone on this call has got to be somewhat curious about it, or you've done it, or you're working on it. But there's a lot of people not on this call for a reason. Like they're not ready to deal with it. And so, like my husband, I'm a grief counselor. I work in the field of death and dying. My husband does not want to talk about this stuff, at all. He does not want to talk about end of life planning. I can't get him to do it. And so it's pretty amazing. I mean, I've gotten him to budge a little bit on some important things, but not all this kind of stuff. So what's been your experience with people who are experiencing resistance from family members or whatnot?
Yeah, well, also one really weird resistance is I get a lot of parents of clients who approach their grown children and say, "Hey, you and your dad and I, or your dad and I have been, doing our planning." And then the grown adult children are like, "Oh, I'm sure you're fine. Don't even worry about it. I'm sure it'll all be taken care of." And I'm just like, "Well, wait a minute. Now, I know that you as a grown adult do not want your parents to die, and you don't want to think about that. But if your parents are reaching out to you, they are parenting you. Advanced planning is ultimately about love." But I think the main point of resistance for everybody is planning isn't prophecy.
Yeah.
If you are going to buy car insurance and shop around, once you buy it, do you immediately get in a car accident? So it's just like, you aren't going to die. People think they're tempting some sort of Grim Reaper fate, or maybe the kitty Grim Reaper. But people don't kind of connect it, and you writing something down isn't suddenly going to make you keel over and join the invisible choir. So I think it's just the resistance of, if they plan, that means they're going to die instantly. And if it's a terminally ill client that is getting their planning together, they feel that planning is giving up. But it's not giving up. It's just preparing, because everybody's going. We're ultimately going to the same place. We have the same fate. The leading cause of death, as my friend Shelley Wizen says from the Soul Diving Institute, is birth. That's the leading cause of death. We're all going there. So it's so much better to plan in advance when you're not having a sudden emergency surgery, because when you check in that morning, they're going to ask you, do you have your advanced planning done? And if you don't, they're going to give it to you right then and there. So a couple hours before surgery, are you going to really want to put your mind towards dying? So I tell people it's so much easier when death is an abstraction, when everybody is relaxed in a relaxed environment, and you can just talk these things through. But I just think the main point of resistance is also the way our cultural narrative is about death. It's morbid, it's dark, it's black, it's awful. And if you think about it, our society accepts death, but only in very strange ways, like slasher movies. And, around Halloween, people put tombstones in their front yard and hang up skeletons and all those things. But the actual reality of it, I feel like, never kind of sinks in, because people don't want it to.
I am going to continue asking Amy a few more questions, but if you guys want to start putting questions or comments in the chat box, we're going to open it up soon. You can also come on video if you want to talk about your experience of this or ask Amy any questions. How do you raise a hand, Dara? There's like a little button you can push to raise your hand, and we'll know that you want to come on video.
If you go to, there's like reactions. Sorry, I forget. I think you can.
Oh, it's in participants. If you open participants, there's a blue button on the bottom.
So you can also, like, physically, if you just want to raise your hand, that's fine. We'll keep our eyes out for you.
The pioneers used to.
I think one of the things too, the resistance, is that it can be sad. you know, when I was working on this the other week, I got through like a lot of the real end parts. Like in the beginning, it was fine. It was like all the organizational stuff, right? My passwords and all those things. And then I started getting into the deeper stuff. And I was really imagining like my kids going through this, you know, and having to have these objects and have me gone or have this knowledge or whatever it was. And by the time I was done, I was really like, I was pretty in an emotional state. I came out to the living room and my husband was like watching the news and I'm just bawling and he's like, whoa, what happened? You know? And I was like, it was just really hard to really fully go there, even though it may not happen. I could live to be 100, you know, but I'm so glad. The thing about it that I really emphasize to people is that it reduces anxiety about death and about dying. Like it makes me feel 100 times better to know that those things are in place, you know,
that you're not leaving a mess. That's
right.
the thing too. It's just like, okay, well, if it's overwhelming for you to face your own advanced planning, imagine how overwhelming it's going to be for your loved ones who are actually going to have to do the donkey work. They're going to curse your name and say, why didn't they plan?
Have you seen an uptick in this during COVID? How has this been for you? Because I bet you've been really busy with people. I feel like this has been such a wake-up call for everyone that we really do finally need to get our stuff in order.
It's true. I mean, you know it's bad when the healthcare workers are coming out and saying that before a shift, I'm gathering my whole team together and we're double checking. Okay, you call this person, and if this happens, I don't want to be intubated and all of that stuff. So, you know, as I joked, you know, shit gets real when the healthcare workers are, you know, doing that the first thing when they go into work. And so it's just COVID has definitely brought that awareness that nobody is safe from death. And I definitely have seen an uptick in departure files being sold for sure, because people want to get their stuff together, which I think is great, but I'm just sad that a global pandemic is what caused it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. You work sometimes with whole groups of families, right? Like you'll work with the whole family. Rather, I mean, I had a party and like had all my friends over, but you'll actually sit down with like a family, right?
Yeah, those are my favorite because you learn so much about your family members. And I had a good to go party in Dayton, Ohio, where I'm from, a year before my dad died. And my dad was healthy and he was 71 and he came to the good to go party. And I learned so much about him, even though I'm the deathy girl and we talk openly about death, but I couldn't believe it. He told the group, he was just like, oh, I want to be buried, or I want to die outside if I can, like the Native Americans. Yeah. And I'm like, who are you? I never knew this. But the families are the best because they learn so much from each other. And then, unfortunately, when a family member that has come to a good to go party passes away, I hear from their grown kids who were just like, I remember us having that conversation and I felt like my mom was guiding me through the departure file because I remember back at the party. And I also ask people, how do you want to be memorialized? And there are so many suggestions, you know, and like you were saying, you know, encouraging your clients to make a list of favorite places. I encourage people to talk to their grandparents or whoever they're close to that may be dying and say, hey, what do you want to name our pets? You know, let's start a tradition of naming pets after grandpa's favorite books or his characters or what it's just like I discovered after reading your book about continuing bonds,
Yeah.
you know, that memorialization that'll bring the peeps, you know, your dead rellies into the everyday so you can just have them around, you know. Or I had a client that asked her daughter, you know, maybe you could plant some milkweed because that's where the butterflies go to, and then you can think of me when you're gardening, and you know, so things like that.
I love that. What do you think? I mean, you've touched a little bit on how people during COVID right now are not able to be with their loved ones in the hospital, but also there's this other aspect of people who are grieving in isolation, you know, people who are on their own in quarantine, grieving in isolation, people are not able to have memorials, funerals, sit shiva, like so many aspects of that. What are your thoughts on that and how we can kind of support those issues?
it's just a whole new world in grief, basically. And, you know, I think the worst thing for grievers is to be isolated. I mean, obviously there is a lot of time for agonizing self-reflection when someone dies, but I just feel it's so important to have your grief validated and to feel understood, to feel, I remember when I first was going to grief therapy, I just wanted to know that I wasn't crazy. And so in my personal experience of friends who've had relatives or loved ones die from COVID, you know, I just make sure I check in with them and I keep texting them. That's what I tell my clients, just, you know, just send a text, send an email, say, I'm thinking of you, I'm sending you dinner on Friday, pick a restaurant, you know, anything that kind of allows the griever to not have to use their brain, you know, of like, when is a good time for you to I don't know, you know, and just say, hey, I'm taking out your trash bins on Sunday, so you don't have to worry about it, or whatever, you know. And so I encourage everybody to just, you know, stay in touch as much as possible. But you have to acknowledge it's hard. It's so hard, because especially if there's a limited amount of people that are allowed at the gravesite, so then, you know, family and relatives aren't allowed to come and say goodbye. So, you know, it's such a difficult thing. But I think the main thing is I just want the grievers to know they're not alone. And that's what I think everybody that works in this space, you know, wants people to feel, is that you're not alone and that we care about you, you know, and you're going to be okay one of these days, and it's okay if you're not okay. You just got to feel it.
Totally. I've seen too, I have a lot of clients who went through a loss pre-COVID, but in the last year or two, and then going into COVID, still grieving, you know, and only recently having lost that person has been really hard for some of them, because it is such a new world, and then they're so isolated on top of that. Talk to me about how long we should be allowed to grieve, Amy. This is an interesting conversation I like to have with people in the end of life space, because our culture has one idea about it, but those of us in this space have some different thoughts.
It's forever, you know, as long as the person lives in your heart, that's how long you're going to grieve. That's how long you're going to think of them. You know, it is a lifelong process, and it ebbs and flows and it changes. You know, a lot of people say that, you know, grief is like the ocean, and, you know, and you do get waves that are overwhelming and things like that. But it's just, it's just the hardest thing. And I know that as I get older, or even in the pandemic, so my mom died in 2012, my dad died in 2016, and now it's 2020, we have this pandemic. I feel like my grief is a little different now towards them, because I'm so isolated, I want to be comforted, and you know, my parents were the natural comforters, you know, and I often think of like, oh, I kind of wish I had them during this time, you know. But then on the other hand, I'm so glad that they are rocking the afterlife, because I would be hairless with worry over them getting it, you know. So it's just, grieving is forever, but it's not going to reign forever. It's not going to feel that heaviness like you have in the early days of grief. But I say grieving's forever, and you can have a breakdown 7 years after your dad dies, if you're handling it okay, or in a healthy way or a positive way. And sometimes, I'm going to quote you, Claire, sometimes you just miss your mom. And that gave me such permission to still feel the feelings all these years later. And even today, on the anniversary of my mom's death, you know, I was just trying to think of, you know, my mind flashes back to when I was waiting to hear, is she okay? You know, did something happen to her? I hadn't heard from her. And then you just kind of focus on some of the dumb things. Like I thought, well, now I'm waiting to hear if my mom is alive or dead, or if something happened to her. And if she's dead, I'll probably not be hungry, so I better make some nachos. What? You know, but it's just, you know, your mind goes back to different things. It remembers different things maybe that you've pushed back. But grieving's a lifelong process, and I think that is a healthy, positive thing.
Yeah, I don't think we ever get over losing someone we love. You know, I think we learn to live with it. I think we carry it forward into our lives. My mom's been gone 23 years now, and I still miss her every day. I think about her in some way every day. I'm always wearing something of hers. I've got her earrings on today, you know. Um, and I'm not, you know, I'm living a really vibrant, meaningful life, and I'm really happy, but I still miss my mom and my dad, and I wish that I had them. And I think that you know, our culture really assumes that 23 years later, you should not still be talking about your dead mom, but I am. But I also think one of the interesting things that ties into our conversation today with this death planning work is that beginning period in the first few months after we lose someone. It's very busy. You're kind of in shock and numb, but you're also having to do all this stuff, right? Like close out somebody's life and plan a memorial and just deal with a lot of things. And everybody's around a lot. And then in the 3 to 6 month mark, that stuff is done and everybody kind of falls away and isn't there anymore. And that's often when the real grief is actually setting in.
Totally. I call that after the casseroles have gone, you know, that time period. I think it's the hardest. And so that's why it's even more important to be in touch with people, and you're not going to remind them of their dead relative. Trust me, it's on their mind already. They're going to feel grateful that you acknowledge that it's still hard, even a couple months afterwards. You know, I can remember 2 years after both my parents died. I just I saw a movie and it reminded me of them, and I got really weepy, and my best friend called me and said, "Oh, are you crying?" And I said, "Yeah, sorry." And she goes, "Oh, what happened?" And I said, "Oh, just, you know, the parents dying thing." And she goes, "Oh, I thought it was something new." And I just thought, no, just the fact that I'm in deep cosmic pain and I'm an orphan now. But yeah, that's just what's going on today, you know? And so it is hard to understand if you haven't gone through it.
Yeah, I agree. There's a really nice comment here from Eva about death being her greatest teacher and being inspired by your booklet. And Brenda says, a coworker of mine lost her mom this morning. Is it ever too soon to reach out?
I don't believe so. I mean, you know, as long as it's not asking them for something, you know, and I always, when I text someone who's just lost someone, I just say, you don't have to reply. You don't have to text back, but I just wanted to say, I'm holding you in my heart and I'm so sorry. And, you know, but I think it's never too soon. What do you think? You're the therapist. I don't want to cause anyone.
I think it's so important to acknowledge when someone has gone through a loss and is grieving. I think you're right. There's this careful line where we don't want to burden someone who's grieving, right? So we don't want to like ask them, what can I do for you? And then make them come up with some kind of answer, right? We just want to offer them things, or just tell them we're supporting them, or not expect responses. I think it's a really good thing to acknowledge right away, and then maybe a follow-up in a couple of weeks if you don't hear from your coworker because she's, you know, in this space right now. But and then in a couple of weeks following up, you know, and just telling her that you're still thinking about her. I think it's really
my sort of pet peeve is when people say, if there's anything you need, let me know. And when I was grieving and in those early days, I didn't know what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah. And so it was hard for me to come up with something. And so that's why I tell my clients to come up with something concrete, you know, and just say, I'm going to drop off a lasagna and you don't have to do anything. I'm going to put it on the front porch. You don't have to bathe. You don't have to answer the door. You know, it's just do something for that person, whether it's, you know, offering it to help on the school run or take the garbage bins out or any concrete things. Just say, I'm going to do this for you. And the person will say either yes or no, but they'll likely probably be like, thank you.
Yeah, it's so similar to when friends of mine have had new babies, and you just go over and you just take care of them. You bring them some food and you let them sit on the couch and freak out about this new baby, and you take out their trash, you know, and you bring them some glass of water and, like, you know, just really doing things, anticipating someone's needs, or, you know, just trying to be helpful in that way, but not putting that burden on them.
Yeah.
Amy, what are some of your favorite ways to honor loved ones and like feel connected with them?
I love lighting a candle. I can't tell you, I'm such a candle buff because I feel like the element is, you know, the element of fire in some ways. I feel like it reaches them easier, you know, and I had those candles, votives made for my mom and my dad's life celebrations with their signatures on them, and a little, goodie bag for people to come and remember them by. And I often light candles. I'm a big music fan, and so even this morning as I was getting ready, I believe my mom was playing Cosmic DJ on my shuffle today, and that was pretty amazing. I also just have their things, and it can be a dumb sentimental thing like an old toothpick holder from the 50s that makes me think of them. I have my dad's cutting boards, so every day when I make a meal, I use his stuff. I have my mom's dishes, so I talk to them all the time. I ask for their help and their guidance, and I believe they can hear me. I believe that they can help, and so I just and I constantly talk about them, and they are basically the original investors in Good to Go. I have so many stories from my mom and my dad of what I learned from both of their lives and their deaths that are incorporated into Good to Go. So I feel as long as I do Good to Go, they're still they're with me and they're helping.
Yeah, definitely. Yesterday from my dad's death anniversary, some years I'm really feeling it more than others, and so either some years I'm really missing them, or I'm going through some stuff in my life, or I'm feeling extra inspired. Like on the 10th anniversary of his death, I took a flying lesson. My dad was a pilot in World War II, and it made me feel so close to him. I loved it so much. I just took like a small plane flying lesson out of Santa Monica, and it felt like a really cool thing to do. One year I had one of your Good to Go parties, which felt like a really nice thing to do on my mom's anniversary. I always write my mom a letter every year, not my dad for some reason. Yesterday I made a vodka martini, one of my dad's tumblers, because that's what he drank, and I put some olives in it. And I did a toast to him. And so,
I love that. I'm going to have some chocolate chip cookies later on. It's my mom's recipe. And so I'm going to bake some of my mom's stuff today, I think.
Yeah. The 1 year mark, I think, of going through grief is really intense, when you're getting up to that 1 year, because you're going through all of those firsts, right? You're going through the first birthday, theirs, yours. You're going through different like events that happen. If you have to go to a family occasion and they're not there, you go through the holidays, like, December time, Thanksgiving, all of those things. And it's just so intense. And then you build up to that 1 year mark. What was that like for you? Did you find, I usually see an interesting shift around the 1 year mark?
Well, I just for me, the second year was harder than the first year. I felt the first year you are just trying to figure out, how to put one foot in front of the other, and how to live your new normal, how to create your new normal. And especially if it's a parent, you've had them your entire first half of your life, if you're lucky, and now they're not here anymore. So it is so weird. And all those firsts were just so leaden and, kind of sad. And then the second year, it was just kind of like, it hit me that it's the second year of forever that they're gone. And that was just I don't know what I was thinking that first year. I guess you're just trying to figure out how to, I think I was basically focused on endurance and survival, and then the second year you do have kind of an idea of that, okay, I am going to survive, but now what? So I think the second year for me was definitely a now what do I do now that the firsts are done?
Yeah, I know. I think grief can sometimes build on itself. And my friend and colleague Hope Edelman talks about these neon numbers that we come up against too. Like if it's a parent you lost, reaching the age that they were when they died, when my mom was 58, and I'll at some point reach that and what that will feel like. Or when I hit the halfway mark of that she had been in my life half the time, like when I turned 36, and I realized that she had been gone as long as she had been here, and so that was really hard. And the day after that, I felt like I've been alive longer without her, and that was really tough.
And the longer you move away from the early heavy days of grief, the less you're connected to the dead person, because in a way your grief connects you to them. And so through my grief therapy, it took me a while to realize that my sadness and pain isn't what's gonna keep me connected with them. It's the love, you know?
I see that all the time. Have you heard the term complicated grief?
Yes, I have.
And so I think that feeds into that. Sometimes I see a lot of clients who will hold on to their grief as a way of holding on to their person. And that happens often. You know, I think when we're in that grieving space, it's a very tender space and we do feel very connected to them. And I think the grieving itself feels like a way of honoring them. And I think that when we imagine letting go of it and moving forward in our life, it feels like we're letting go of our person. So finding ways to hold on to them in other ways, I think, is really important.
Because you think of them all the time, every day, especially in the early days. It was just like dead mom, dead mom, dead mom. That was all that was in my head. You know, I would like order a pizza and I would just be thinking like, I'll have a large pizza, my mom's dead, and I'll have pepperoni and my mom's dead. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, it's so prevalent. And then when you kind of aren't in that almost obsession. I mean, I kind of joke that, you know, with my clients, are you stalking your dead relatives by obsessing over them and thinking of them every minute of every day, you know, because that's how it was for me. And so it's hard to know what to do with that brain space and know what to do with that love too. After my dad died, I thought, well, where does that love go? I have so much love that and you know, time that I put into him, and now that he's gone, where do I put it, you know? And I just decided, well, I guess I have to put it to myself and out to others, you know?
I think that there's so many different ways that grief can become complicated like that. It's just so much to navigate. And I think we can get stuck in certain places. You mentioned your grief therapy. Like, I think it's so helpful to go through that. And what I've loved doing is when I started working with Hope Edelman, who wrote Motherless Daughters, we started hosting all these retreats and doing work together. And we were working with women who had lost their moms 20, 30, 40 years ago, you know? And it's not so much that they were grieving, but they were really still grappling with the loss. They were seeing the effects of it play out over the course of their lifetime. And so then I started to get all these different clients who had, you know, been holding on to grief or still moving through loss for a couple of decades. And I think there's so much rich work to be done in that space. Did you like your grief therapist?
Oh, it saved my life. I mean, I had never experienced a huge death like that before, and I didn't have the skills or the tools to figure out how to do it, you know, and because my family at the time were so freaked out over the death, you know, and didn't know how to communicate that, I was basically on my own. You know, I wasn't getting any of that grief validation from my family. And even my dad would say to me, you know, how can you get upset and cry when you talk about your mom 3 years later? And I'm just like, she's what? You know, and so my therapist really just allowed me to feel my feelings and to realize that they weren't crazy. Because I do feel grief is crazy making. And my therapist told me, or it might have been my friend, I can't remember, but they were saying that if it's the first death, your brain is trying to look through your Rolodex of, okay, let's look up mom dead, how to feel. Okay, what do you do in that circumstance? And your brain's going through the Rolodex, but it's not going to find that card because it's never happened before. And so it's that kind of like anxiety that starts to build up because you've never experienced this before. What is it like? What does grief look like? Is it like in the movies? Am I weird if I'm not sobbing, you know, and crying on the floor, or you know, am I weird for just having a little Demi Moore silent tear like in Ghost? I mean, it's just having a grief therapist to remind me you're not crazy. And, you know, things like you are going to remember your mom forever. You're not going to forget the sound of her voice. You're not going to forget how it felt when she kissed you or hugged you or did these things for you. You know, it was just kind of, he just made me feel like it was going to be okay. And I think that that's what I needed. And I think, when you're feeling that vulnerable and that raw, it's just like, tell me what to do. And my grief therapist did.
I want to wrap up in a moment by having you just kind of tell us a little bit more about how to get started with departure files or all this end of life planning. But I'm curious, for all of you guys who are on video, would you raise your hands if you've already started doing this kind of end of life stuff, or if you have these files going? How many of you guys have started?
Yay, Sheila. Yay, Brenda. Yay, Patricia. Yay, Alyssa.
So how do you get started with this? I mean, obviously we can go to you and purchase a departure file, which I think is great. But I remember one of the things that you encouraged was for us to take our time. This isn't something you can really like get through and finish writing in a day. I mean, it's a lot of stuff and it's emotional. What are your tips for kind of getting started on this journey of end of life planning?
Well, I definitely think the conversation should start first and, start talking about your wishes, make it an everyday thing, bring it up at family gatherings, whether it's on the 4th of July and you're having a barbecue, and say, hey, would you want your cremains shot out in a firework? I read that and that would be fun. And then get the conversation started, that kind of thing. So it's just start the conversation is the first step. And then if you order the departure file, I always say, it helps to have another person tag team with you. You can say, okay, we need the phone bill. What's the customer number? What's the phone number? What's the website? I'll write it down. So it kind of goes faster if you can kind of get some help. One person finding the information, one person writing it down. And then for the, spiritual part of the booklet, I always say, take after Allen Ginsberg, the poet. And I love his expression of first thought, best thought. So if it says favorite childhood memories, you don't necessarily have to labor over it for, weeks and thinking these are the last words of myself. But, it's just first thought, best thought, whatever your favorite childhood memories are, they're going to be kind of at the forefront of your mind anyway. And you can always add to the booklet. And as far as taking time goes, I think it's important to let your loved ones know that if there is something that you want done with your body, as far as, getting ashes sprinkled somewhere, that there's no hurry. And that there is, because a lot of people maybe don't have time or the money at that point when you die to go to London to sprinkle your ashes over Westminster Bridge. So I tell people, put in the departure file, it's okay if you take your time. And then also, it's okay if you don't care what happens to your stuff, or if you don't care what your relatives want to do with your body or whatever, that itself is an instruction. Yeah. So that instruction frees them up and be like, well, they said whatever we want, so why don't we get together and figure it out or whatever. But I don't encourage that. I encourage you to have a plan. But just talk to your people. And I had 2 clients, married couple, and they wanted to be traditionally buried. And I said, talk to your grown kids and tell them your plans as you're filling this out, as you're filling out your departure file. And it turns out that the kids didn't want their parents to be buried. They wanted them to be cremated. So each of them could have, both of them could have both of their ashes and place them somewhere more meaningful than a cemetery.
I love that. And then you also, I remember you were advising us to have more than one person know about our departure file and where we keep it. And I have 2 people, like I have my husband and then I have a very organized best friend who knows, and so I feel like my husband will probably forget what I told him, or like even if I send him an email that has this information in it, he'll lose it, so my friend I know would remind him.
Yeah, I mean, I say keep it with your taxes, update it every year, because your life changes, your address changes, as you know, and it's important to update it every year with your taxes, and just to keep it with your sensitive information, with your tax information, and just to let people know that it exists. That's the most important thing. And when I say to have the conversation, I say, hey, if I die, this is the first person that you call. My departure file is located here, and these are the things that I want, and I don't have parents that you need to call, and so my friends have a plan. And even more so because of COVID, I told my friend who I was quarantining with, I said, hey, I don't want to be hospitalized. I don't want to be intubated. And if I die on your watch, I don't want you to feel guilty because, this is a random disease and I lived a good life and I don't want you to feel guilty. If I die in your home, I don't want to, I'm not planning on it, but, just know that I love you and that I died happy, that kind of thing. And that's just a weird 30-second conversation. And my friend who's 36, was just like, okay. But if something would have happened to me, imagine how me saying that to her would help her heal through her grief positively,
Sheila has an interesting comment here. She said, in some of these areas like the advanced healthcare circle, I don't know what I want. I'm sort of stuck. Plus deciding whether to have both step kids share the trustee duties or, as some lawyers insist, to pick one of them is a charged issue.
Yeah, I mean,
where's a good place to get counsel on this kind of stuff?
I would definitely talk to an estate attorney, and they have seen it all, and so they would be best to guide you. Personally, I think it's better to name someone outside of the family, like a good friend, only because of all the emotions involved and the energy, like I said, when somebody dies, and that's going to eliminate jealousy between another one, or I say talk to who you're going to include in your paperwork. Let them know, like, okay, you're a beneficiary of this, but so is your brother, and it's equal. So I don't want to have any of your shit as I'm floating on a cloud. I don't want to see you guys fighting over it or whatever, because you can answer questions with your people right here, right now. When you go, they're not going to be able to ask you, hey, why did you make that decision? Or why did you give that favorite couch to her instead of me, or whatever,
Totally. Amy, where can we find you, and how can we get in touch with you and stay in touch with you and learn more from you?
Yeah, I have a website. It's good to go peace, as in peace and love, .org. And I'm on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at good to go peace. And on Facebook, on the Good to Go Facebook page, I go live every Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern for Grievers and Groovers, where we just talk about grief. And sometimes the topic is, what's the weirdest thing someone said to you in your grief? I had a friend say, I really know what you're going through. My pet lizard died and I was really, really devastated. I'm like, oh, okay. So we have all these kind of real life griefy things to talk about. And sometimes it's just, I'm sad today. I want to hear what you guys are thinking, or what's going on with you. So I would love for people, if they're grieving, to join us live every Wednesday. And the departure files are for sale on my website.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for the work you do. I just think you're amazing.
Thank you. And I hope everybody is good to go. I want everyone to get their advanced planning done. It's the most loving thing that you can do. It's all about love.
Really true. Thank you, guys. We will have Dr. BJ Miller on next week to talk with us about his new company and all kinds of end-of-life things. So I hope we will see more of you next week. And thank you to everybody for being here today. Dara, I'll let you close out.
Yes. Well, thank you both. I have to say I started taking notes as you were talking, Amy and Claire, about all the things that I haven't figured out. So
you need to get a departure file. You'll know exactly.
I know. I think I am going to get one, because this was, I think I actually went more in depth than I ever have in my brain around what kinds of things I need to figure out.
My hot flashes during my cougar puberty actually didn't flare up during the interview. I'm so happy now. Sweating.
Well, we would have loved you anyway, so it doesn't, I'm happy for your sake it didn't happen.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to see you, Sheila, Stephanie, everybody.
Yeah, and I'm putting in links for our next 2 holding spaces. So
Yeah.
the one next
Jay
week.
Miller is next week, but then we also have my psychic medium friend Fleur coming the week after that, and to talk about like the afterlife and connecting with people that we love. She's amazing, and that should be a rich conversation.
And then a link will be going up today for our Dose of Togetherness on Monday with actually one of our attendees today, Sheila Merle, who is our devoted Reimagine, I don't know, supporter in so many different ways. So we're going to be doing a fun dance party and reflection with Sheila Merle on Monday. So look out for that. Okay, well, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you next week. Oh, and as Stephanie mentioned, thank you, Stephanie, we have our vigil, which is actually a musical vigil as a way to memorialize those who've died from racial injustice, COVID-19, and just others, loved ones during this time. So I will put that link in there as well. There's a lot going on, and as well as an event next week with art responders with one of my favorite comedians, Chris Garcia. So sorry, we've got too much going on to keep track of. But
all right, thank you, everybody.
Okay, I'll see you guys soon.
Thanks. Bye, Amy. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.